Good morning. We're here today to talk about the Local Food and Farmers Market Promotion Program and what you need to know if you're interested in applying for either of these programs. Today we have Jim Matson and Jessica Shaw from Matson Consultant in Aiken, and they have worked with this program for many years and are here to go through everything again to let you know if you're eligible and if you are interested, what it takes to apply. So I will let Jessica take over.
Thanks, Kyle. So like Kyle mentioned, we're just going to go briefly over the program and the priorities for each program. We'll also review the applicant and project eligibility, as well as application requirements, and then we'll get into some of the frequently asked questions about the program. So starting out, let's first talk about what is the Local Food Promotion Program and the Farmers Market Promotion Program. So the LFPP and the FMPP both aim to increase consumer access to fresh local foods, as well as develop new market opportunities for farmers and producers. So again, they have that dual purpose of the focus on consumers, as well as the focus on farmers and producers. They also both share priorities and prioritize projects that are located in communities of concentrated poverty and also with limited access to food. So for priority consideration, your project would have to be located in or serving areas that are considered low income or low access. And that is based off of the ERS's Food Access Research Atlas. We do provide a link there, and when you go into that atlas, essentially you can find a track number for the communities that you're serving, and you can put up to 3 of those numbers in your application for priority consideration. Again, you don't have to be physically located in that area. So like your building, if it's in an area that isn't low income, low access, it could still be eligible for priority consideration if you're serving areas like your farmers or your consumers are coming from those areas of need. Also, your project doesn't have to be in those areas at all, but we strongly encourage it because, again, they're going to prioritize the applications that are serving those low income and low access areas. So let's talk about the FMPP, which is the Farmers Market Promotion Program. And projects under that program specifically focus on expanding or developing direct-to-consumer markets. Those markets can include farmers markets, roadside stands, CSAs, online markets, essentially anywhere where you're connecting the farmer directly to the end consumer. And so that could even be farmers selling directly into restaurants or institutions. FMPP projects are divided up between 2 categories. The first one is capacity building, and those projects specifically aim to build long-term organizational capacity. So they award up to $500,000 towards an applicant who can conduct strategic planning, market assessments, conduct recruitment and outreach to get new farmers or to find new customers, basically anything that's focused on organizational capacity. And keep in mind, these projects typically have a little bit of a smaller focus or a more local focus to them, but still involve multiple organizations. On the other hand, you have community development, training, and technical assistance projects, which engage a little bit larger local and regional group of stakeholders to provide outreach, training, and technical assistance. They can provide up to $500,000 to conduct, for example, statewide training, regional training. You can expand or develop a network of farmers or farmers markets and provide technical assistance to producers. But again, keep in mind that it is supposed to have a little bit more of a broad focus, either statewide or regional, engaging in multiple organizations in that area. Now, the Local Food Promotion Program focuses on projects that connect producers and consumers through an intermediary. And that can include a food hub, a distributor, a processor, grocery stores, anybody who might be that middleman between producer and consumer. And also keep in mind under this program for the USDA, local food is any food that's sold within 400 miles of where it's produced or within the state where it's produced. So again, the LFPP is divided up into 2 project categories, the first one being planning projects, and those are any activities that are related to planning for the expansion or development of a local food business. So they would award up to $100,000, and you can use that to develop feasibility studies, business plans, marketing plans, conduct training and education, provide technical assistance for the project. Then on the other hand, you have implementation projects, which are kind of the next step where you're actually implementing a lot of those activities for expanding and developing your local food business. So that can award up to $500,000. And you can use that to hire and train new staff, conduct outreach and marketing to get new customers, wholesale customers, or more farmers into your program. You can also use it to institute group gap or establish new wholesale market channels, including through an online portal. So both the FMPP and the LFPP have ineligible activities. So these are things that you cannot use grant funds for or include in your project. So that includes purchasing food. You cannot purchase any food using grant funds or your matching funds. This includes food that you would be buying from the farmers to either sell to the end consumer or to buy from the farmers to then donate. So no food purchases at all. Also, no production related expenses. You cannot pay for farm equipment or tools. That includes high tunnels or anything on the food production side. You also cannot have lease to own vehicles, which you are allowed to lease a vehicle under the application, but you cannot own it at the end. Your lease does have to terminate it. You also can't purchase a vehicle. And then no activities that only benefit one producer or one organization in your application. Additionally, you can't have any activities that's solely related to SNAP enrollment, education outreach, or marketing for SNAP. So SNAP can be included if you're marketing it as a form of payment that maybe your market accepts, but you can't do any specific recruitment to get customers to sign up for SNAP or to train farmers in how to use SNAP. So just be very cautious if your project includes any sort of SNAP focus on it. Also, no general use equipment. That's anything that can go beyond the scope of the project or is not directly related to the project activities. This does include coolers, cooling units, walk-in coolers. Again, it has to be something that is only specific to those project activities and only needed for the project. And then, of course, any activities that aren't directly related to supporting or marketing local foods are also not allowed. Now, there are multiple types of entities that are eligible to apply for this program, and we've listed some of them here. There's also full definitions of each of these entity types listed on the website and in the RFA, which we'll link below. And then, so just to cover a couple of those, agricultural businesses and cooperatives can include individual farmers. So an individual farmer could be considered an agricultural business. However, your project, and this goes for any applicant entity, does have to include partnerships and collaborators and has to be benefiting multiple groups, multiple people. It cannot just be for the sole benefit of your farm or your only organization. So some other applicant types could also be nonprofits, producer networks, producer associations. Essentially, groups of farmers are allowed to apply, and any organizations that are helping out farmers are eligible to apply. So again, you have to have that focus on supporting local and regional food businesses. You also have to be able to provide the required documentation to show that you're one of those eligible businesses, and you have to be a domestic entity located within the United States. So I've talked a little bit about partners and collaborators. Let's get into what that exactly means. So like I said, you do have to include partners and collaborators on your project. So a partnership is involving a close cooperation between you and another entity, and that entity has specified responsibilities within the management of the project. So they have a dedicated scope of work that they are going to be performing under the project. So that could include a contractor or a subawardee that has that scope, and they have the direct responsibilities for the management of that piece of the project. They must also provide a letter that details their responsibilities and their commitment of what they're providing to the project. On the other hand, you have collaborators, which are unaffiliated with the applicant. They're kind of a step back from partnerships where they agree to cooperate in some capacity to fulfill a portion of the project, but they maybe don't have a specified scope of work or have that immediate responsibility to manage that part of the project. So this could be someone like a community organization that agrees to help disseminate some of your project results or conduct some marketing for you, just kind of as an aside activity as a collaborator with you. Again, they would need to provide a letter that describes their role as a collaborator and how they intend to participate in the project. Both programs also require matching funds, which is the cost share that is provided by the applicant in addition to the grant funds that you're requesting. So both require 25% match of the grant funds. and the matching funds have to be committed and in place at the time of your application. So for example, if you are requesting $500,000 in grant funds, you would have to provide an additional $125,000 in match. And so your total budget would then be $625,000. So something to keep in mind while you're applying and putting together your budget. There are a couple sources of matching funds that you can use. These are cash match or in-kind match. Cash match is pretty much how it sounds. It's any physical cash that you have that's held in an account that can be held by you as the applicant or any of your partners who would contribute it towards the project. It could also be any paid personnel time. So if you have a project manager who you as the applicant are paying, that is considered cash match as well. Any other services or goods that you are physically also paying for is considered cash match. In-kind is any volunteer or donated labor, time, goods, services, essentially anything that where money does not exchange hands, you don't transfer any funds, that's considered in-kind. Keep in mind for your match, any labor personnel that's used as a match should only be for the percentage of their time that they're putting towards the project. So like I said, if you're paying that project manager, but that only represents half of their duties within your organization, you would only account for 50% of their time towards that project. You can also use unrecovered indirect costs, which are the indirect costs that you're not charging towards the grant award. You can use that as your match. You can use your negotiated indirect cost rate or the standard 10% of direct costs as your indirect. Again, all of your matching funds must be committed and in place at the time of your proposal, and that is shown through letters provided by each person who's contributing to the match. So each person will have to write a letter that details how much match they're providing, what form it is, if it's cash or in kind, the source of that match, and when it would be provided towards the grant. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jim, who's going to talk to you guys a little bit about grant writing basics and just going through the application and best practices.
Hey, good day, y'all. I was going to talk about just, actually the physical process of writing the grant, what you need to do, the timing and all that. But, a couple of key points before we get started. As always, when you're doing a grant, keep it clear, concise. If it's not in the grant document, it doesn't count. Use the forms they give you. They're actually fairly well laid out and fairly clear in this process. The Ag Marketing Service does a good job with this. You have to answer everything. If you skip over things, you may be ineligible, or you would certainly be scored down for not having those. And take your time, write it ahead of time so you have enough time to go back and edit it. The clear way of making sure you're good and what sounds perfect the first time. When you let it set down a little bit and breathe, you find out it doesn't read quite as well as you thought it did originally. Make sure you have all the supporting documents and submit it on time. They have been very strict about making sure you're getting it in by the deadline. And give yourself maybe a little extra time, because if you have any verbal with the internet or trying to get things up at the last minute, or if there's power outages, weather, other things, you cause trouble, and that would make all your efforts wasted up until that point. So, just wanted to hit that. But along with that, then let's dive in a couple of details about what you actually are going to need to be required to do this. So you have to register in the federal system. You start off currently with getting a DUNS number. With that, then you get a SAM. You should probably already have an EIN number for your business or set up. If not, that's required. And then you have to go in and register in grants.gov. Also, new for 2022, they're setting up what's called the UEI system. The federal government is moving away from the DUNS to what they're calling a unique entity identifier. But I assume that process, currently you're getting that within the DUNS system, but just letting you know, depending upon time, the government is transitioning to that new UEI system with that. You got to fill out your forms, specifically the 424, in grants.gov, so that you can, put down what your project is about, what's happening. Fill out the project narrative, and that is the document provided by the agency where you're talking about what you're doing. You have to use that template within there. In the past, it's been about 15 pages of writing in the template when you get it, and you're allowed to add 15 pages to that. So you get a total of about 30 pages. This year's application hasn't come out yet, so we're not exactly sure about the length for this year. But, And when you're going through that, make sure you're only using those, activities that are eligible over the project and other things. Jessica mentioned some things about, they can't be focused on SNAP, or you can't do these other activities. If you include those, your project will get thrown out. You got to have everything signed and verified for the matching funds, your commitments, your collaborator organizations and all that within the process, or you can't do it, within there. And, let's look real fast as we're going there and start through this, what is required. That's physically what your application package is going to look like. Well, at least look like electronically. So the DUNS number. The DUNS is required currently for all federal grant funding. It should take, not very long to fill out. Also, this should be free. I will mention both of these. The DUNS and SAM should be free. If you get into a system where somebody is trying to charge you, you're working with a third-party vendor, these can go from being just expensive to being dubious, shall we say, within there. So make sure for both the DUNS and SAM, these are always going to be free for you. And if you get into a system, stop providing it within there. So you're going to go there. But what you need within SAM, the DUNS, you have to get the DUNS first. You provide basic information about who your business is that existed, and then getting into the SAM, which is the System for Award Management. It's required for all federal contracting. And it allows you to both be registered in the grant system, but it's also how you get paid out of the federal system as well. You have to match your information with that about your business, your bank account, your tax information. Everything has to match up. It's not the clearest system in the world. It'll probably take you about 2 hours of going through there to make sure you have that once you have all your information gathered. But it's just a critical piece of that, and you're unable to move on until you have this. And speaking of which, we always encourage you to get these early. And I want to talk about that a little bit with the time frame of the application stuff. So I would say that if you're thinking about doing it, go ahead and do it ahead of time and make sure that you have it. Make sure you get in the system, because if you don't have your SAM number, you can't get into grants.gov, which is where you have to upload your grants. Grants.gov, you use your SAM number to get in there. You have to have the active SAM and DUM to be able to get in there. They must match. It will be sent back to the administrative email that you put up associated with your SAM account when you're setting it up. So that's where you get your back, and that's how they try to make sure they're only one person that's happy with that. You have to register for this account, with your application, and here's a link to it. And this one actually is not, the registration itself is not that complicated as far as getting the grants.gov site set up. You just want to be sure everything's matching and make sure that that email is correct, that you're putting into the SAM system, and that you have access to it, because that's sort of your link to everything that you're starting. Later, you can add other emails and let other people in if you're working with, vendors or having somebody else help you write. There are ways to share that. But if you can't get your administrative one set up, it can be complicated on that. So be sure that you're hitting that at the beginning. And there's, like I say, there's the link on it, with that system. Time frame. We always say, if you're thinking about applying for any federal grant, go ahead and do the process for SAM and DUNS now, because you're going to need those for any federal grant. Typically, the grant varies in time. Last year, it was a little bit later than other things because they added extra funding for the pandemic, and applications were due the end of June. Other years, it has been in May, early May, with application deadlines. So it does vary a little bit. I wouldn't count on a particular date. From the time the grant is announced, you typically have about 60 days to fill out an application and have it turned in. And sort of backing up to that, the DUNS number should take 1 or 2 business days to get the number sent to you electronically once you have your information correct. The SAM number takes about 7 to 10 days of submitting the paperwork. You also, for a SAM, you have to send in a notarized letter showing that you have authority to engage on behalf of your business. So you have to get that done, which can take a little while. However, if there is a problem in the SAM system, it can take much longer. So you want to be sure that you have everything, it's matching up, and everything goes well. it's 7 to 10 days. If it goes badly, it can take much longer than that. So that's why we encourage you to get that ahead of time. You know, again, if your business, you probably already have an EIN. If you're already up and operating as a business and at the level to apply for a $500,000 grant. But if you don't, you know, it's a couple weeks working with the federal government to file your information to get your, you know, TIN or EIN number. The grants.gov profile, registering, get that. It can be fairly quick, or like I said, it can take up to a couple of weeks to get everything set and then to get the linkage back to your, you know, your authorized representative. So again, if you're looking at this on this system, if you wait till the grant's announced, you're already more than a month into the grant if you're trying to wait to do this once the grant's announced. So we try to encourage you to get this done as quickly as you can so you have time to update the information. And the application itself, although you're writing 15 pages, can take quite a while to gather that information and gather those letters of support and verification and all those things. They can take a while to pull those together. But let's dive into the writing of the application and just what you need to do for that. So again, AMS, the Ag Marketing Service, the USDA provides a template for that. They will download a new one for the new cycle. The template itself has not varied that much over the past several years. So if you're listening to this before the application gets announced, you can look at the template for the year before. It probably will give you a good starting point. But again, you want to do it on the current year template, you know, fill out all the sections of the application. Check all the boxes of the type of the application you're doing, the type of applicant you are, how the program works on it, and the project narrative. You have to use, you know, 11-point font, and you can't use those undergraduate tricks of, you know, changing the margin, changing the font size, changing the creaning. You know, you're limited to 15 pages in the format that they provide. So if you go over that, you know, you've wasted your time on stuff. So, you know, make sure of that. Now, you can, these letters of support and other things that you have to have, those don't count as part of the 15 pages that you're allowed to write. So it'd be a 30-page grant narrative as total because there's already a lot of space in the document. So that one thing that's a little confusing when you first look at it. But again, your narrative itself will probably end up, if they're using the format they've been using in the past, of being about 30 pages with that. And so I'd look at that one. Let's move on to the next slide with that. Key thing that you're trying to do when you're writing it is not just writing whatever, it's what are you going to, you know, accomplish with the project? You know, what are you trying to do? What are you expected to do? So within the grant, the language that they use are outcomes and indicators. So the outcomes are, what are you going to accomplish? Indicator, how you're measuring it, how's it working, what's going within there. There's a long list of those. You probably, not all of those will fit your project. Every project is different. You may be working with chefs, you may not be working, you may be working with schools, you may not, you may be working regional. So there's a long list. I'm not going to go through all those because they're pretty self-explanatory, but you need to address all of them. And even if you're not accomplishing that outcome, you need to answer that outcome is not applicable for you, who you are. You know, when you're doing those outcomes and indicators, part of what you have to do is you have to discuss how you're going to track those outcomes to make sure you're doing them. It's one thing to say you're going to do them with the application side, but one of the key things on this grant that you're measured for is how do you track those outcomes and how do you have an evaluation process in place so that you can make sure that you are accomplishing what you said you're doing with the money. This grant is very, very specific that, you know, what you're asking for is what you need to be doing for the grant. It's not one of those where you can ask for something and then want to change it to something else or tweak it. On this grant, you very much need to be focused on, before you apply, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to accomplish. Here's how we're going to measure it. And here's how I know that we're going to be able to track this. So you have to be able to kind of meet all 4 of those boxes within the process, you know, to be able to look at that. And then we kind of have some things that we think around when you're writing on the grant, what I would say sort of the consultant's advice. And again, you know, do multiple rounds of edits. within those edits, have more than just yourself look at the grant. You know, send it out to a pair of fresh eyes to work on. In our shop, we have numerous people look at every application, and the thing is that you have to, there's a line that says you have to be willing to to write good stuff. You have to be willing to kill your beloved, right? And on the grant, what that means is, don't be focused on your language or what you're trying to say. It's making sure you're saying what is going to ring well for the reviewer, what's going to be heard well, what you hear well, but also to make sure you're avoiding, mistakes or not mentioning things, because we are so close to our projects that we just skip over things that are clear to us may not be clear to an outside person. So having that time to make sure that you have somebody review it. Other things also, make sure your budget adds up, make sure the categories and where you're expensing fits into what you have. On this particular grant, they're very specific on costing, so you know what things are costing. It is not a grant just to guess about costing on. They want to know what the costs are going to be. I know you're projecting in the future, and it's hard sometimes, but they want to see what your estimates are based on. So if you're doing, travel or other things, say how far you're going to be going. If you're doing marketing, give an idea of where you're going to be placing the ads and how much it can cost to place those ads, how many you're placing, et cetera, for the thing, In the budget, as I say, divide these tasks down. Don't just say I'm spending on marketing, talk about the steps, talk about how you're doing, how these steps fit together to add up to a whole that makes sense, that the reviewers can follow along, that they can see, how you're accomplishing these steps, where it leads to, and again, how those fits into those outcomes and indicators with that in it. And this grant, although you're the person doing it, you really want to talk about how you're helping the producers, whether it's FMPP, LFPP, how are you accomplishing outreach to them? How are you making them better off through doing things? If you have a rural store that you're operating or a food hub, it's great that you have the food hub and that you're selling things, but how is that making the producers that are selling through the food hub or through that store an area of need better off? So that's what the focus really needs to be on. And then again, you're going to prove that through the letters that you're getting from people. So it's one thing for you to say it, but you want to be able to prove that through letters that you're getting from people saying that this project is making them better off. They're increasing their sales. They're increasing their profitability when you're doing that. And how that's happening is through the assigned letters. You're going to get letters from them, and that's part of what's going to take that time that we mentioned, doing things ahead of time, and that's showing that people are participating, that the partners are there, that you have people collaborating with you. And Jessica did an excellent job about breaking out the difference between a partner and a collaborator. But that's always one to go back and double check. So if you've forgotten that, scroll back in the recording and go back over that one. But you have to have these letters that have to be signed by people. That takes time. You want to show that you have the funds for all of your budget, and it's going to add up to your budget. That you have the commitment from the producers, from other collaborators, from people that you're working with, that shows how you're building this team that's going to make this project successful. And then in some cases, like I say, if you need particular facilities, you're going to have to include a letter of evidence about, and this is included with the grant package, that you have the resources needed to accomplish the grant. If you need trucking infrastructure, if you need building, if you need training facilities, other things within here, you need the letter showing that you have these resources there and they exist before the grant starts. Okay, that is one area. This is not a grant to go build things as well. If you have the negotiated indirect cost agreement, the NICRA, you have to include that letter. If you don't have it, we won't go into what that is today, but if you don't have it, if you know what it is, just be sure that you include it. If not, and Jessica mentioned this previously, you can use what they call the de minimis overhead rate of 10%. You can still charge a little bit, but again, all these are required. If you don't have these documents of matching funds, partners, collaborators, the infrastructure, your grant is not eligible. So you have to have this to show that your grant is eligible and what you're going to do with the process there. Then How do you turn it in? We've mentioned this before, but everything has to go through grants.gov. You know, if you don't have that system set up in grants.gov, it's not working, you're out of luck. They will not accept any other system. Also within grants.gov, you set up a workspace, you do that for each grant. You know, make sure that you have included documents, you know, PDF, Word files. We're a much bigger fan of submitting things in PDF because they tend to load better and you don't have as much stuff. But also if you do not have access to converting things to that, if you have a Word, to make sure that you don't have, you know, track changes, comments, other draft sections in that if you end up using the Word system in that, you know. All of the forms, you fill them out in the grant workspace. Typically, if you're doing it the first time, we often recommend downloading them, printing them, filling them out manually or electronically, and then going back in and copying it back into grants.gov. It just makes it easier if you're not trying to think about what it means at the same time you're filling out the actual form. And you can fill these grants out. You can start on the forms ahead of time before you submit, so you can put them in, work on them, and then you hit the submit button when everything is done correctly. So you don't have to do it all in one session as well. But also, again, make sure you're doing your Word files, make sure you have that project narrative, all those supporting documents in there, and they lay out the system, the sections of where they want you to include those in your workspace. And it varies slightly from year to year how they want it laid out within the workspace, but it's usually very clear about where different documents go to within there. And typically they have FAQs up on the website for AMS that shows where they want things on that. So how does it work once you've done this on the system? What happens once you hit that submit button? Right, you know, it goes off into the ether, and the first thing I'm going to say is you're going to be waiting a while. This is not something you're going to hear back in a week or two. You know, typically they've announced they announce these in the late summer into early fall, often into September. So again, if you're doing an application in May, you may not hear anything until September on it, one way or another. So what's happening during that time before the grants come out? Where is it going? Well, AMS bundles them. They get the collection in around electronically. They have a group of reviewers that are independent contractors, usually, you know, small groups, typically, you know, 3 to 4 people in each group. This group gets 7 to 10 applications to look at, and they rank those applications, discuss them within their group, usually over a month or 6-week process or so, but they go through each application. Of the 10 that they have, let's say, they rank it, they pull out the best 1 or 2 out of this ranking, and those get submitted to go on to the back to AMS to look at. Once those go there, the Ag Marketing Service, USDA, you know, full-time employees, they look at these high ranked ones. They make sure that there's not any eligibility questions that the review panel may have missed. They look at details within that. If they have questions, they may ask questions about the grant at this point in time. So I will say that if you submit your grant in May or June, and they get a reply back from USDA in July or early August asking you to clarify something, that's usually a good sign. It usually means you made it through that peer review process and ranked well, and they're doing the administrative review and are trying to double check on things. So, but you know, if there's something that they find that they think might be ineligible or it's not clear, they may come back with you and discuss doing a negotiation to say, hey, we need to take this out because it doesn't work. Can you still, you know, accomplish your goals of your grant if we take this piece out? Or do something else, a small change. And usually that has to do with it's only small changes. If it gets too big, they will then, you know, send the whole grant out. They're not required to do that, but typically because they want to fund good projects, they look at that and they're willing to come back and look at grants and try to fund things on the process with that. So again, I wouldn't expect to hear anything until the late summer. Like I say, it may be end of August, September before it's coming out. You know, if you're awarded, you're going to get an email that it is successful. They will give you the budget as done. You will start the process of signing paperwork, all that. Even once it's announced, you still are going to have a lag before you can start spending money because you have to get paperwork signed with the federal government. That takes a while. They're also doing all the applications at the same time. We have a fairly small shop working on it. If you're not awarded, they will provide the comments from the reviewers, so you can look at strengthening it for the future. And I will say, having written some of these and having some rejected, you can go back in and strengthen it based on the reviewers' comments and get it awarded in the next cycle. We certainly have had that done in the past with folks we've worked with, but but know that you can look at it, do it, and there is some variation because you are going to those individual small committees. Different committees are going to prioritize slightly different things. I always make the comment when I say this that some people like, some people like Matisse, some people like Van Gogh, some people like Windsor on the artwork. There's just all different things that people like. So there's going to be variation about what these groups happen. It's not fully a science when you're sending a grant in. When you're doing that, this process has been competitive in the past. Last year, they had a lot of extra money put in because of COVID funding. And so about 40% of the grants were awarded. In the past, it's been low 20% that's been awarded. This year, it appears that the COVID money has been spent. So I would suspect applications to be probably back down in that low 20s or even lower percentage rates of trying to go what it takes to be funded. So you're going to want to do a good one, because again, that means basically 1 out of 5 are going to be funded at the grant stuff.
Okay, thanks, Jim and Jessica. That was great. A lot of really good information. So we're just going to go over some often questions that come up, just to kind of get ahead of some of the questions y'all might have. So as you can see, and Jessica talked a little bit about this, can you use grant funds for normal operating expenses? Jim, Jessica, y'all want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so essentially you want your project to be an expansion or an innovative approach of what you're currently doing, or just beyond normal business practices. Basically, they don't want to pay for things that you're already doing that are just kind of continuing the norm. They want to see that this is going to have a bigger benefit and bigger impact through that expansion or new approach that you have.
Thank you, Jessica. Okay, so can you apply for the LFPP and FMPP? We love acronyms around here at the same time. Expand on that a little bit.
Sure, I'll take this one. You can go after both of them, but it has to be clear. Again, and both of these programs have different areas. They're including farmers markets and local foods, although there's overlap. So you can apply for both of them, but they need to be clear that you're going for different projects. You can't throw the same project into both pools. It has to be, separate project activities, separate, things that you're going for, and very clear budgets, and funding is coming from different places on that for the support. So it is a possibility to win it. It doesn't happen that often because, again, the overlap of what people are doing tends to separate it into different groups. But if you happen to have 2 different projects that work for both, you're allowed to apply for both.
And you can also only receive one of each, so you can't receive multiple LFPPs or multiple FMPPs within the same cycle.
Good point, Jessica. Good point.
Thank y'all. And Jim, you mentioned this just kind of at the very end there, but just to stress again, how long it takes the funds to be awarded.
Yeah, again, you're going to be applying probably late spring, early summer is when this program typically comes out. You're not going to hear anything until the end of summer, into fall, and you probably won't be spending money until October or so of this year when it's awarded. So there definitely is a lag. You need to be looking over that horizon, and when you're waiting to find out, it does seem to take forever.
Okay, and just a quick summary of everything Jim and Jessica just went over. Plan ahead, that's very important. There's a lot of detail that goes into these grant applications, so you want to get ahead of the game. Again, as they both mentioned, you're going to need partnerships for this project. So drawing on partnerships you already have, or potentially reaching out for new partnerships under this grant is a great idea. Again, plan ahead. So you need to in plenty of time be able to obtain and complete the required documentation. So especially like if you're asking partners for letters and stuff, it's very good to reach out in plenty of time, so you give them plenty of time to respond. Again, you want to follow the narrative form. So don't go rogue and put together an application that doesn't follow the project narrative form. So be sure to do that. And you can never proofread enough. So proofread, edit, all that good stuff. It's always a good idea to have other people look at it, even maybe someone that has nothing to do with the project, because they might come across things that people directly involved might not be able to. So just keep that in mind, and always go over your application over and over. It can't hurt. And then again, if any of you are interested in potentially applying or have more questions, here is all 3 of our contact information. We're happy to help when we can. Again, we're unable to actually write an application for you, but we can help a little bit in the process if you're interested. Jim and Jessica, do y'all have anything else to add?
I don't think so.
Good luck, and thank you for letting us talk to you about it.
Yes, thank you, everybody.